State, let's tell you that the United States Secretary Antony Blinken is expected to arrive Nigeria today. Mr. Blinken is on a 4-country tour to Africa, where he will also visit Cape Verde. He has visited Cape Verde. He has visited Ivory Coast and Angola as well. He will visit Angola as part of the U.S. commitment to deepening relations with Africa despite global crisis. On Monday, Mr. Blinken was in Cape Verde, where he held talks with Prime Minister Correa Silva and visited the city's port, which received funding for modernization efforts from the U.S. government's Millennium Challenge Corporation. He also visited Abidjan, the largest city and the economic capital of Côte d'Ivoire, on Monday. A chief U.S. diplomat's trip to West Africa comes as Washington deepens its economic and security partnership in regions where China and Russia have made significant inroads. Global Affairs analyst Adebayo Olowo-Ake joins me on the news for more perspective to this visit. Good to have you join us.
Good afternoon, and thanks for having me.
This is the second visit in 2 years. The first visit by Secretary Blinken was during the Muhammadu Buhari administration, and now he's visiting again as we have a relatively new president in the country. But what does this mean for the bilateral relations between Nigeria and the U.S.?
I think it's a welcome development in the sense that both countries have to, of course, deepen fraternal relations. I also think that in view of certain pending or ongoing engagement between both states in the area of trade and diplomacy, I think the U.S. is trying to send the right kind of message, that it hasn't forgotten Africa, neither has she forgotten Nigeria. The trade relationship between both states, if you recall, as at 2022, we had a deficit of about 177 million US dollars. Trade, whether export or import, has often hovered around $5.2, $5.4 billion. But then, if we also look at the fact that there has been a significant reduction in the volume of trade between both states for various reasons, one would recognize the fact that there's a need to try to shore up economic relationship and exchanges. I think as well that the African Growth and Opportunities Act, within which Nigeria actually doesn't really play much, but many other African countries have really benefited from that. This was an act passed on by former President Bill Clinton. But if you look at Nigeria's role or what Nigeria benefits from that, we have not been able to significantly take advantage. Nonetheless, one would see this visit as one that might explore newer areas. For example, the Euro-Atlantic powers require another source of gas, given what is happening between Russia and Ukraine. And Nigeria, of course, always has a lot of gas, and the issue now will be how to harness that. So coming to Nigeria, going to Angola, both countries being powerhouses in the oil industry, suggests that perhaps there will be some exploring what benefits could accrue for both states in this area. And then I feel that on the whole, it's more, it's more to demonstrate that the United States has not forgotten Africa, and especially also Nigeria.
And in terms of not forgetting Africa, he's also coming at a time where we've seen coups just recently in Niger. And then, people have talked about the continued instability in the West African region. What role can the U.S. play in bringing stability to the West African region?
On the question of the coup in Niger, I think that the Americans demonstrated inconsistency. Remember that the U.S. has a base there. The French also have a base there. But there were discordant tunes in how both France and the United States responded to what happened in Niger. The French allied with the ECOWAS countries in roundly condemning the coup and trying to see if they could reinstate President Bazoum, whereas the Americans kept quiet for a very long time, and their position was actually very vague. That's very strange coming from the United States, which always tries to champion democracy and human rights. So I think that the U.S. needs to demonstrate some consistency and transparency. Secondly, also talking about relationship with Niger, there were reports some months back of a drone getting into Nigerian airspace illegally. And Nigeria was able to acquire and track that drone on radar. I mean, it's obvious this drone most likely was a U.S. drone. And so I'm sure that there will have been backroom diplomatic channels to douse the tensions that came from that. But again, it demonstrates that America must show consistency and transparency in its relationship with especially those countries it considers to be allies. But on a broader West African scenario, I think the U.S. has voiced support for ECOWAS position. The challenge will now be to see the U.S. demonstrate in a robust manner that it actually is indeed supporting the ECOWAS position. And then for the U.S. not to see any of its engagement with Africa always from the point of view of trying to counter China, because this is often the narrative of U.S. policymakers. And I think such a narrative is extremely condescending. It suggests that Africans are unable to determine by themselves who their friends are. And I think Secretary Blinken will do well to hear from the Nigerian point and the West African point during this visit and transmit this position to policymakers in the U.S.
And we'll see how we're able to front-load some of these benefits from this trip. Thank you so much for your interesting points today. Global Affairs Analyst Adebayo Lowaki.